So let's talk about formal and informal channels of communication. A formal channel of communication is officially determined by the management. So there can be a question directly asked in the examination as to which kind of channel out of these two is officially determined by the management, a formal or an informal channel. Or they might give you certain features of formal and informal channels and ask you to segregate between them as to which one of these features belongs to formal category and which one of them belongs to informal category. So in a formal channel of communication is officially determined by the management. It can be downward, it can be upward, or it can be horizontal. So in all the three channels that we saw, chain, wheel and circle, it was either downward or upward in chain. In wheel it was horizontal from one direction to other, or vertical downward upward, and in chain it was again moving in a circle. It was moving in a circle, so it was either vertical or horizontal in nature. Downward, the purpose of downward communication in a formal method of communication, channel of communication, is to give orders or to give instructions. So a superior would be trying to either give orders to a subordinate or certain instructions, whereas the method or the purpose of upward communication in a formal channel is to give report or to make request. So if I'm talking to my superior, either I am providing him reports, I am there's certain grievance redressal going on, or I'm making some request to the superior. And in a horizontal communication, in formal channel of communication, the purpose is coordination. So if I'm talking with my colleagues, I'm trying to coordinate with them, whether it's about talking about a project or about certain other things. The purpose is to coordinate with your colleagues. In an informal communication channel, on the other hand, the purpose is social interaction. It's faster communication than a formal channel of communication, and grapevine is the primary channel of informal communication. It fills the gap existing in formal communication systems. So formal communication system can be only vertical or horizontal in nature. Therefore, informal channel tries to fill the gap that exists in formal communication systems. So if I want to communicate cross department, across the department, with another superior or with another colleague uh, in another department, that I cannot do so in a formal channel of communication. So what I will do, I will use informal channel of communication. For example, lunchtime is the best time where you indulge in informal channels of communication. So in lunchtime you're communicating with other people of other departments, and in that way you're using informal channel of communication, namely grapevine. So you're using grapevine to communicate cross department with other people in the organization. So let's see the difference as provided in the books. It is based on formal organizational relationships. As I said, it is not based on formal organizational relationships. It is free from formalities. The channels are pre-planned, the channels are not pre-planned. So in a grapevine there is no channel provided. You can communicate with anybody that you want to. Therefore, there is no pre-planned channel. It is rigid as deviations are not allowed. In a chain, for example, you can communicate only with your immediate superior or subordinate. You cannot cross the channel and talk to other people. So deviations are not allowed, whereas a grapevine or an informal communication channel is flexible. It is much slower than an informal communication, and therefore, because it has to follow a particular path laid down by the management. On the other hand, informal communication systems are faster because you do not have to follow any path. Chances of distortion of information are very few, so it is important to remember that distortion is more in an informal communication channel and less in a formal communication channel. Chances of distortion are very high. In case of formal communication, status or position of the parties is very important. So your position becomes important when you're communicating with the other person, whereas in an informal communication system, the position of the parties has no relevance at all. Formal communication system or channel is authentic, but informal messages may not be authentic. So this was what I was talking about, rumors. So rumors are not authentic messages which are spread in informal systems, whereas they do not take place in a formal communication channel, because only authentic information is shared in a formal communication channel. Now let's talk about verbal and non-verbal communication. Very important to understand and remember the difference between two. So verbal here does not mean only talking to the other person. So what I'm doing right now, I'm using both. I'm using different forms of verbal communication with you guys. So I'm using both speaking and writing as a method of communication with you guys. So I'm using verbal communication. There are no facial expressions. There are no specific non-verbal communication happening right now. But let's think over it again. Am I right or am I wrong? Am I using only verbal communication, or am I using non-verbal communication as well? We'll talk about it and we'll find out what is happening. So this is for sure that I am using verbal communication because I'm speaking with you and I'm at the same time writing also. So I'm using oral as well as written communication methods with you guys. So written communication is permanent because whatever I have written here is going to stay as the video is recorded, and therefore you can get back to me and tell me that this is what I have written wrong. So it's a permanent kind of a communication when it's written, whereas if it's an oral communication, an unrecorded oral communication, then you cannot do so because I can easily deny saying that I never said this. So written communication which is verbal is permanent, whereas a written communication is slow. So what I'm talking to you right now is much faster or much speedier than what I have written on the screen. So whatever I have written is only a part of what I'm talking to you about, for the reason that written communication is slow. Written communication cannot be changed by the receiver, so this is an advantage. So this is the sender, which is me, and this is the message, and let's skip everything, and this is the receiver, which is you. So if I'm communicating to you through a written communication, then you cannot, if you're passing it to someone else, let's say there's another party, which is he or she, another third person, so you cannot change the communication which I have provided to you. Whatever information I have provided to you through written communication is going to remain the same, whether you provide it to one other person or many other people. So it's going to remain the same. Whereas if I provide you only oral communication, so what I do is I only communicate with you through words. So for example, if I'm talking to you or talking with you on the phone, and you start disseminating that information to other people who are your friends, then what happens? You might change that communication according to your perception and according to your convenience. So if I say to you, if I tell you that uh, 8 to 9 hours of study is good, but you can even make it by 4 to 5 hours per day, and then you perceive it as 4 to 5 hours is enough, so you have changed the communication. Whatever I told you, you have changed it completely. I said that 8 to 9 hours is good, but you can make it into 4 to 5 hours as well, but you perceived it as 4 to 5 hours is enough. I can easily crack it in 4 to 5 hours studying every day, and therefore I'm going to do just that. I'm going to study only for 4 to 5 hours. So you perceived it according to your own need, and then you started disseminating it to other people who are your friends, and that is why you changed. That is how you changed the communication when it was oral communication. So let's talk about the differences. In an oral versus written communication is expressed through spoken words, whereas in a written communication is expressed through writing. Oral communication may not be precise, whereas written communication is very precise. Oral communication may not be complete. It may be difficult to understand it. So whatever I'm saying to you, you may not be able to comprehend it or understand it because it's oral communication. Whereas in a written communication, it does not happen. It is not difficult to understand if it is expressed in unambiguous terms. So if everything is written clearly, then it is not very difficult to understand it. Uh, it is generally informal in nature, so oral communication is more informal because I'm talking to you directly, whereas written communication is more formal in nature. It may not be taken seriously. So when we're talking about organizations, then oral communication may not be taken seriously, whereas a written communication is taken more seriously. So if a memo is issued by your senior to you in an organization tomorrow, then it has to be taken very seriously. But if he just calls you and says that whatever you have done is wrong and you should not do it again, then it will not be taken very seriously. Oral message may not be verifiable. As I said, that written communication is permanent, it cannot be changed, and therefore it is verifiable in nature. Now let's talk about non-verbal communication. So I'm going to take two examples. What I'm doing right now with you, the communication that is happening between us, we clarified that verbal communication is involved. Verbal communication is involved. I'm talking to you and I am also writing things, writing something and communicating with you. Therefore, both oral and written method of verbal communication is involved. Now let's find out if non-verbal is involved or not. So non-verbal includes body movements, facial expressions, emphasis given to words, this is important, and distance between sender and receiver. So these are the four major kinds of non-verbal methods of communication. So which part of non-verbal communication is actually taking place between me and you? The third one, emphasis given to words. So by emphasizing certain words differently than other words, I am trying to communicate. I'm trying to communicate to you something different from what others are trying to communicate to you. So if I'm trying to emphasize certain words more than other words, then I'm trying to communicate with you in a different way than I would if it was written. So if I had written simply that oral communication is vulnerable to change, whereas written communication is permanent and therefore cannot be changed. So let me say it without emphasizing any word, and then let me say it with emphasis given to certain words. Oral communication is vulnerable to change, whereas written communication is permanent and therefore cannot be changed. So there's a difference. Now I'm going to emphasize certain words, and then let's see how do you perceive it. Oral communication is more vulnerable to change, whereas a written communication is more permanent in nature and therefore it's less vulnerable to change. So I'm emphasizing certain words and therefore trying to affect the communication which is happening between me and you, and that is what is non-verbal communication. One part of it is emphasis given to words. So when I'm communicating with you, I'm using both verbal and non-verbal methods or channels of communication. So the best example that I had that I could find out as a non-verbal method of communication is Mr. Bean. So by using different body movements and different facial expressions, he's trying to communicate to the receiver, he's trying to communicate to the viewer something that might not have been communicated. So by here looking at Snickers in this manner, he's trying to communicate that he loves it. So by acting like, so by making this expression and this hand gesture, he's trying to communicate that he's acting like James Bond. So that is the communication that he's sending. So he's using different body movements. Hand gesture is a body movement here. Hand gesture is a body movement here. He's using different facial expressions when he's thinking about Snickers. That is a facial expression that he's using. There is no emphasis given to words. He does not speak at all, but he's using body movements and facial expressions to express or to communicate with the viewer. So that is the best non-verbal communication example that you can find out. For example, pat on the back and handshake in organization. So if I'm patting you on the back, I'm communicating with you non-verbally and telling you that I'm proud of you. Similarly, if there's a strong handshake between the superior and the subordinate after a certain job, then it means that I'm very happy with the subordinate's actions or subordinate's job. So that these are the non-verbal communication channels which are used in the organization and outside.